Hi, in this video I'm going to cover creating a dataset file for a complex employer. In a previous video we covered setup for a vanilla or easy, simple employer. In this case we're going to do one more complex. Now I've already created the dataset file as per the instructions in the earlier video, and I've got it open here, but I haven't entered any data into it as yet. So I'll just open this file, and as you can see there's nothing in here as yet. Now the first step is to open the STP fields and select the fields that we're going to need. As mentioned in the previous video, certain fields are compulsory and they're already selected for you. What we need to do is scroll down and find the fields that we need. I'll just make that a little bit wider. So we know we need reported employer super. We know we need voluntary agreement. So when you select one, it selects both of them because they're linked. And if we go down lower, we've got a working holiday maker. Again, both are selected. Now we've got a number of allowances this time, so the 5 standard ones, plus we've got four others. We've also got union fees and workplace giving. And so now what you can see is we've got 38 selected STP fields. Now with these extra allowance ones, there's a facility for you and you need to record what that allowance is for. So the tax office has provided these 5 generic ones, and if you use more than that you need to provide a description yourself. So what we need to do that is to double click on here, and that brings up this screen. On this screen you can add some notes if you like, but what we're going to do is add a description for this allowance. So for allowance 1 we've got uniform, and now we click on allowance 2, and here we put telephone, and notice these fields are now being populated here. Allowance description for the third one, we've got tools, and for number 4 we've got dry cleaning. Okay, so those 4 allowance descriptions have now been added, so we can close this screen. The next step is to add the payroll categories from our MYOB file and then map them to those fields. So we start by clicking this button. It starts off with an empty table, and we click Update from Company File. Now this has loaded the data from the company file when I created this dataset file, and you can see there's a whole lot of extra allowances here. Now what we need to do is edit each one and provide some mapping. Map it to an STP field and to a W1, W2 field. Now we could just go into each field, gross pay W1, and when you only got 5 or 10, that's probably the easiest way to do it. However, if you've got a lot of fields like we have here, the easier way is to export, make the changes in Excel, and then import. So let's do that. Payroll category export. It's going to save it all to that file, and that has now been saved. We now switch over to Excel, and we want to open that file, so we change these file types to text files, and there we see our PayCat export file. Double click on that. This brings up the text import wizard. With some exports or imports, that's very important to step through these carefully, but in this case it doesn't matter, so we're just going to click Finish, and that brings up all the exported data from the STP Creator. In this top section here you've got a bit of information, and I just want to widen some of these fields and highlight from here. It says these are the valid mapped fields. These based on the selections we made in STP Creator. These are the fields that have been pre-filled here just for you to copy and paste to avoid errors. And so we just open them up so we can see the whole lot of that field. And some of them along. Right, I'll just highlight. So these highlighted fields are the fields that we can use to map. And so let's get started. The most common one is employee gross, so we just copy and paste it into all these relevant fields. Now, just remember we only need to do the mapping for payroll categories we've actually used. So, for example, we may not have used overtime, etc. I'm just going to stop the video. I'm going to go through and copy and paste those fields into the mapping field column and add the W1, W2 settings as well. Back in a tick. Okay, now I've finished updating these, and as mentioned in the other video, these first 5 are never used by MYOB. So I've got here employee gross by all of these amounts. We don't use any of these fields here in our payroll. We've got union fee, we've attached union fees and made not reportable. Sick leave accrual, even though they're accruals, so you still need to map them, so they're mapped to not reportable and NA. Additional employee additional super is not reportable and NA. The salary sacrifice ones we're just going to leave blank and not map them here. I'll explain why later. Super guarantee is mapped to super guarantee NA. Withholding is employee tax W2. Car allowance is car allowance W1. Meal allowance, etc. travel. Now allowance 1, which was uniform allowance, allowance 2 was telephone, allowance 3 was tools, and it seems I mustn't have selected allowance 4 because it doesn't appear on this list here. So we'll just leave that for to do manually. So once you've finished all this, we basically save this as a tab delimited file. It's already tab delimited, and we're going to call this import. Click save, and it'll tell us that it's not compatible. Things like having sheets, it's saying, do you want to keep it in this workbook format? And we say yes, and it's now been saved, and we can now close this. And just say no because we've already saved it. Okay, now we're back at the mapping screen. So what we can do is click import, and it's going to tell us that this will replace any data. So what it's going to do is delete it and then import, and it's got here a note here: salary sacrifice offsets will not be imported and will need to be manually reset. That's why we didn't do the salary sacrifice earlier. So let's click import, select this file, and what you can see is all those mappings have been brought in as per our spreadsheet. Now I'm just going to close this for a tick and go back to here and just have a look what happened with allowance 4. Okay, so for some reason I must have unticked it and it wasn't selected, and that's why they didn't come through in the spreadsheet. So I'll go back here, and I just want to do a bit of tidying up or explain a couple of things. In relation to super, employee additional is not reportable. Employer additional is reportable as RESC, but in this case we didn't use that one, so it's not, we no need to map it. What we did use, however, is salary sacrifice. Now with salary sacrifice, STP Creator gives you 2 choices. You can report the RESC each week or each pay as you go, or you can report it at the end of the year like what most people do. We'll just show you both methods so you can decide what works best for you. We recommend that you do it at the end of the year rather than reporting it as you go. It just gives you more flexibility. Your accountant might appreciate it. So with this one, an employee has decided to report RESC each payment. So let's bring this one up and show you how to set that up here. So the mapping for amounts should go to RESC. W1, because that needs to net, because when we're doing our BAS we need to deduct those amounts. And what we need to do select here is a salary sacrifice offset field. So select employee gross pay. This is effectively what you do when you're doing the payment summary assistant in MYOB. You're mapping the salary sacrificed amounts as a deduction against the gross pay. So this is a setup for an employee for whom you want to report RESC as you go. So we can just close that. Now we've got another one for whom we're going to report RESC only at the end of the year. I'll just show you the setup for that. So we edit. The mapping this time is not reportable. We still need W1 here, and the offset field is the same. And basically that means we're not going to report the RESC during the year. We're only going to report it at the end of the year when we finalize this employee's payment summary. Okay. Now in our example we've also got these two salary sacrificers superannuation. We've also got a salary sacrificer who's purchased a laptop. So that's got reportable fringe benefits implications, but we'll show you how that is set up here as well. So we edit that. For mapping we put not reportable. For W1 we put W1, and the offset is the same as we got for the super employee gross. So what you can see here that these salary sacrifice have got an offset identified as having a yes. We now need to map dry cleaning, which was allowance 4 that didn't show up in the previous export. Now just to illustrate allowances, we've got an extra allowance. We've already used up the 5 standard ones that come with the ATO provided allowances. We've used up the 4 that we've uniform, telephone, tools and dry cleaning, but we've got a 5th allowance. So what we do here is we edit and attach it to allowance number 1. And what this does is it gives us the ability to override that for a particular employee. I'll explain that as we go. But we're mapping that to allowance 1, and what you can see is that uniform is also mapped to allowance 1. I'll just explain that later on. One thing we need to do, particularly after importing, is run this to check the mapping. No mapping or W1, W2 errors were detected. Sometimes if we made a mistake in our importing, for example, if we put union fee instead of union fees, that would create an error. But once we're satisfied that we've got all the mapping done, we just click OK. If we miss something, like for example in our import, when we're importing the car allowance, if we hadn't selected W1 there, we wouldn't be alerted to it at this point or with that check mapping. Check mapping only checks for invalid mappings, not missing mappings, but you'd get alerted to the fact that it's missing later on in the process. So we can now close this. The next thing to do for our setup is to attend to the payee. So we click on this payees, click update from company file. That loads all the data from the company file. And what we need to do is select the employees who we're going to report on for STP. At the moment, none of them will be included in STP, and in our case all of them are, so we click on that and then click include in STP. That changes to a yes. If you've got employees in your system, in your company file that maybe have left several years ago, you don't want to report on them, so you don't select those. This should show as no for those particular ones. So once we've decided who's included, we need to run this check, because at the moment there's 7 in STP and 0 checks. So we need to run some checks. Click this button, and that tells us that we detected some errors and we need to attend to them. So I'm going to just close that, and as you can see there's errors here. If you've got a whole lot of them, you can sort it by, put all the errors at the top, and we can click on here, go to each one. The best thing to do is, as soon as you get this, click this update and close, because that'll highlight what the issue is. This employee, well, it's actually our voluntary contractor, and MYOB doesn't allow you to record the ABN in that case. So because there's neither an ABN nor a TFN, it's flagged as an error. So what we're going to do is add in his ABN, which is the generic. It's a valid ABN. It has to be a valid ABN, and we click close. So that one's done. Now we can edit this one and click update. Again, it highlights the issues. Here there's no date of birth, so we're going to select his date of, or her, his date of birth. Probably a little bit young. And there's also an issue the way the address is recorded in MYOB. So we need to fix this, but probably more important, we need to also fix it in the company file. So you need to make a note of any changes you're making and repeat those in the company file so that you don't have to redo it again should you need to load data from the company file again at some stage. So just click Update and Close. Next one is so that was a false report. It's just an error in the code that'll be fixed up. So we just ignore that. And finally, the same thing's going to happen here. So just ignore that. In effect, there are only two errors. And so once we've done that, we've checked, all 7 are checked, we can click Save. So we're almost finished the setup, but not quite, because what we need to do is we need to make some changes to the MYOB file, specifically for these payees. In this case, there's a working holiday maker and a voluntary withholding contractor. Because of the way MYOB works and the way we need to report for STP, we need to make some changes to our MYOB company file. So let's just close that, switch over to our MYOB company file, that one there, and show you what changes need to be made. Okay, we've opened the company file, and what we need to do is have a look at these two employees. And the way MYOB works is when you look at their pay history, change that to year to date. So for STP Creator, this is where all the data comes from, the pay history of the employee tab. And these are all editable amounts, and that explains why sometimes people get discrepancies between what's on their payment summary and what's in other reports in MYOB because somebody's changed the amounts. But in this case, we need to change the amounts because for a voluntary withholding contractor, we've just been using base hourly and taking 20% off under the payment payroll variation rate of 20%, and so it all gets posted to base hourly and PAYG withholding. Now the problem with STP is that we need to report these amounts separately. We need to report that as voluntary withholding gross, and that has to be voluntary withholding PAYG. Now MYOB does not allow you to do that, so we need to apply a bit of a fix, and I'll just explain that in a sec. We'll just have a look at also the working holiday maker. Same thing here. You look at the year to date, he's got base hourly, PAYG withholding. So the solution is to create a new payroll category. At the moment we've got base hourly, so I'm going to create a new one. Called base hourly working holiday maker, and the employee to attach to that is John Smith. And we're going to create a new one also for base hourly vol agreement, and the employee we're going to attach to that is this one here. So what we can do is now go to their card, and so make whatever changes you need to, so that in future when paying John Smith, you're paying him not against base hourly, you're paying him against the base hourly WHM. But to fix up the historical stuff, we need to go in here, go to the payroll details, pay history, and now as you can see in the year to date there's 25,138.75 here, and there's a 0 in here, so we need to shift that from there to there. Now you could go through each month and work out when he was working and make the changes. Not sure what month that was. There we go, there's some there. And so what we ideally need to do is just pick a month where there isn't any, and enter as a negative the 25,138.75, and then put it all in here. As I said, you could go through each individual month and make the changes, but this achieves the purpose for single touch payroll purposes. So when you then look at his year to date, it's 0 there, and it's all going to be reported against working holiday maker. The PAYG withholding, we can't change that. We actually make that change in the STP Creator. So let's do the same thing for our voluntary withholding. Pay history, year to date 15,500. So again, either we can go through and change each individual one, and for those who are want to do it precisely and correctly, that's what you do. But in this case, I'm just going to find a month where if you haven't got an empty month, you can just you'll have to just manipulate the figures so the end result gives you what you need. So when you look at the year to date, that's now showing 0 here, and all his hours will be recorded against base hourly. What you might do while you're here is go into this standard pays, and now that's not letting me change a figure because I must have made a mistake. We go back to his base hourly. I didn't change it to didn't set them as hourly rate ones, which I needed to do. It's the same thing here. So when you go back to his card and change that to 0 and that to 40, and so in future all payments will go against by default to there. And we'll do the same thing for Sam. Oops. Okay, now that's basically the change you need to make to your MYOB file, so we can close MYOB and go back to here. Now what we're going to need to do is to update these payroll details, and although we've read the data from the MYOB file, we need to read it again because we've just made some changes. And so there's a message telling us we've already got data loaded, and we know that. We want to reload it, so we go through this. And what that tells us here is there are more payroll categories in this company file than are in the permanent data set file. We know that because we just added 2. But this is just to show you what will happen if you add a new payroll category during the year, or if you add a new employee, you'd get a similar alert. So what we need to do is we go into here and we need to update from company file. And what that's going to do, you'll see here number 5051, it's not going to change anything here. It's just going to add the extra 2 payroll categories that we now have. Now, all those settings stay as they were, but we need to edit these and select for working holiday maker that all this should get against working holiday maker gross. W1 is the correct thing there. And for this voluntary agreement, we have to put all the gross here and W1. So they're now mapped, everything's now mapped for this company file. There's just 1 or 2 more changes we need to make, and that is here in the payee. What we need to do is because all the PAYG is recorded against employee tax, we need to go to the cards of these 2, in this case working holiday maker, and there's an override button here. So you tick that, and we want, when creating a single touch report, we want all the PAYG to go against working holiday maker PAYG. Same thing for the contractor. We want to override the PAYG for this particular one only to go against the voluntary agreement PAYG. Now you will notice on here that TFN field is empty. We don't display the ABN field, but it is available. And what we should do while at it is we should go back to the STP fields and make sure we tick this, because we want that to show on the final screen as well, given we have a contractor on a voluntary agreement arrangement. So we can close this. Now we need to make one more correction or override. If we click on here, we recall that Peter had received a allowance, an overseas accommodation allowance, but because we'd used up all of the 4 allowances, and we wanted to have a fifth one. For Peter, what we can do is similar to what we've done with the PAYG. We override the description for allowance 1. So what we do is we put in here OS accommodation, and when reporting for allowance 1 for this employee, the system will override the uniform allowance and use OS accommodation. Now, this might not be required by many employers, so you'd think 9 allowance types would cover for most, but this is just to show you what can be done in this case. The other thing I'll point out is because this employee, we're not reporting his RESC during the year, at the end of the year, when finalising the payment summaries, you'd basically click on this bit and enter the annual RESC amount here on the final submission, and that's how you update the year-to-date total. But we won't do that in this case. We'll just stick with this. We save that. Now that is pretty much the setup for a complex employer. Now, we covered a whole lot of things that will unlikely to ever encounter in one company file in real life, but that just gives you an example of how you would set up your company file and your permanent data set to cover a complex situation. So what we now do is just save this, and we're back to here, and that's the end of this video. In the next video I'll show you how to use it. We'll do a payroll, and we'll create the STP report and lodge it for a complex employer. Thanks.